A few months ago, I contributed a piece to a project that will no longer come out in the same form, involving various people answering a different gaming question each week. In my guest appearance, the question was going to be to name and justify the most 7 out of 10 game of all time. This video has been reworked from that audio-only submission, which results in some slightly clunky transition to video, but also why it's about to sound like I'm talking to people who don't know me. Nonetheless, I hope you enjoy. Hello friends, I am Dudley, and as long as you're not going to fact check me too closely here, I'm from the hit YouTube series Yesterzine, involving taking an old gaming magazine and replaying the very worst and best games they reviewed that issue. This of course means my expertise is in the awesome and the dreadful, so the challenge, talk about the most 7 out of 10 video game of all time, is a surprisingly tricky one. I tried to get them to let me do the most 7-Eleven game of all time, because if you Google 7-Eleven video game you genuinely get Halo 3, and that's easy. But no, what we need here is a game that's neither a stunner nor a clunker. Not a Coke, but not an Aldi value Diet Cola either. A game that's essentially fine. It's fine. We've got to play this carefully everyone, because otherwise there's a real danger this whole thing could be a car crash. Which would actually be a good thing, because it's 1988 and on American TV the big new thing is the public service advert showing the value of wearing a seatbelt, using 2 human action figure-like characters known as the Crash Test Dummies. No, well actually yes, the band was named after those dummies, but they also spawned a line of action figures that was so successful that stations refused to air the public service ads anymore, since they contended it was just promotion for the toys, and therefore they should be paid for it. So in the early 90s the toy line abandoned the 2 original characters and, as was very much the general progression for kid-targeted characters at the time, rebooted the whole thing under the very slightly different name, the Incredible Crash Dummies. It worked, and alongside all the usual pocket money hoovering items there was of course a video game. In fact there were 2. One for the NES and SNES, and then this one for the 2 popular handheld formats and our format of choice today. The most 7 out of 10 game of all time is The Incredible Crash Dummies by Flying Edge Acclaim and Software Concepts for the Sega Master System. It will probably not shock you to your core to know this is a simple game. In fact, it is 5 simple games. The basic premise here is that our hero needs a holiday, don't we all, Slick? But first he needs to earn enough money in order to book himself an EasyJet flight to Malaga. In an early prediction of the gig economy, over the 5-day week he is going to do 5 separate jobs, all for a wage that seems derisory, even for 30 years ago. Monday will remind you of the old Amiga game Base Jumpers, or at least the good half of that game, which involved you hurling yourself out of buildings, avoiding all the obstacles, hitting nothing on the way down, and then landing softly with the aid of a parachute. This is that, but the exact opposite. You hurl yourself off the top of the building and try to smash through as many balconies as possible on the way down, and then end by face planting into the pavement harder than a freshman student on their first Friday night on the town. The challenge comes from the fact that some of the balconies are, for reasons of it looking cool, on fire, and from a fairly strict time limit. There's a reason this was the good part of Base Jumpers. The fun here is almost that the object is to play the game badly, and ultimately break yourself into a credible sized jigsaw puzzle on the ground. It's not a mechanic that could support a whole game, none of them are, but luckily it doesn't have to, because soon enough it's Tuesday and we get to drive an actual car. The object here being to test a new air bumper system by driving towards the end of the test track and ramming the car into a very solid looking wall at high speed. The wrinkle is in the air bumper itself, which is wrinkled mainly because no one bothered to inflate it. You do so by collecting the canisters of air littered all along the track. You know, just like in real life. This section is as simple as they come. It's like Micro Machines for people for whom Micro Machines is just too complex. It's a top-down driving game where your car has 3 positions. Diagonal left, up and diagonal right. Sometimes the road splits, sometimes there's what passes for a curve when you can't actually rotate more than 45 degrees from vertical, but that's about it. It's not without its nice touches though. The flying cones are fun, and the little move where one of the air canisters is in mid-air and you can ramp off a jump to get it is actually excellent. The fact that you can move further vertically than you can rotate is probably not worth thinking about. Still, you get to the end and you smack it into a wall, hopefully with a lot of air in the bumper, and we're done. The third one is the other one that rewards you for doing the things that other games would punish you for. You need to get down a ski slope in order to test it, and your aim is actually to hit as many of the flags as possible, with a certain minimum being actively required. Although since the game doesn't actually tell you how many you've hit, I'm not sure what you're supposed to do with this information. If nothing else, this is a good way to expel the stress of playing literally any other skiing game ever. The problem is you're going to need to replace that stress with a different one. The controls are backwards. Pressing left moves your guy left on the screen, but he's going downhill so he turns right. You get over it, and it's an immensely satisfying level, even if it's probably the easiest on the cartridge. Day 4 is the first that feels like an actual video game. It's a root beer tapper clone of all things, set in an ammunition factory. You need to pack, on easy at least, 40 bombs safely. You'd think this is easy, but you have 3 conveyor belts going at once, and the need for a good QA department becomes obvious quite quickly as about half the bombs arrive with the fuses already lit. You need to blow those out, but also remove the various crash test dummy parts which have also made it onto the conveyor, presumably thanks to the bombs that got lit earlier in the process. Like Day 4, the final day is both a real game and one with the aim of avoiding destruction, at least until the end. You have to pilot a cruise missile manually from inside, which seems like a slight design flaw. It also looks like a regular spaceship for some reason. The ship controls with inertia. Think games like Thrust or Asteroids if it had gravity, which actually makes this pretty tricky. It's easily the best game of the 5, and it controls as well as anything of its type, really. You get to the end of this feeling really good about the game as a whole. Which is a shame, because it's over. At least in terms of anything especially new to see. You go back to the beginning and Day 1, the difficulty ramps up, and we go again until we've done 4 full loops. The layout's changed, sure, but you've just seen everything the game has to offer in about the length of this segment. And there, my friends, is the issue. That's not £30 of game. What's there is mostly great, a few minor control issues aside, especially in the factory level, but there's really not a lot of it. It's a kid's game, but that's not really an excuse. Add the ability to play any game to practice, add a few more games, and maybe throw in a continue or two at the start of weeks, and there might be a little more depth to it. At the same time, though, you can't be too harsh to this thing, because you'll get to the end of a turn having had fun. It's like a coin-op that never had an arcade version, and today, of course, you won't be spending £30 for it. The graphics and music are a lot better than you probably imagined from the title and premise. I happen to own a physical copy of this, and I'm glad I do. About 7 glads out of 10, in fact. Fare thee well, folks, and maybe we'll meet again soon, where hopefully my task will be the game Amiga action most overrated. Because believe me, that's already more than written. Toodles!